Good evening, good morning, depending on wherever y'all are calling from. Hopefully that did our accented DJ puzzle some justice, that fade out. But welcome back, y'all. Welcome to Accented. Tonight we have the honor of speaking with screenwriters Maegan Houang and Anchuli Felicia King. This is our 40th episode. If y'all have been to any of the 39 beforehand, welcome back. If this is your first Accented, feel free to talk with us, chop it up with us in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from and what y'all are having for dinner. Our show tonight is focused on rewriting narratives inside being in, and we'll have a chance to get inside the Sympathizer HBO limited series writer's room. Ooh, the whiskey's hitting early tonight. My name is Philip Nguyen, and I'm your co-host slash MC slash hype man for Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, presented by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network, or DVAN. Uh, if you didn't know, now you know. Follow DVAN on Instagram, Facebook. We are _ DVAN, DVAN.org. Our mission is to foster Vietnamese and Southeast Asian literary voices. We empower artists in the diaspora and champion our complex and diverse stories. We are refugees, immigrants, survivors, and their descendants, and believe that our stories must be heard. So if you like what you're hearing tonight, please do consider donating to support the show. You can do that. We'll drop the link in the chat to dvan.org/donate. It's really what helps us keep the show running for 40 episodes and counting. We also want to take this time, I want to take this time to thank our sponsor for this series of Accented, AppLovin. AppLovin's leading marketing platform provides developers a powerful set of solutions to grow their mobile apps. AppLovin's technology platform enables developers to market, monetize, analyze, and publish their apps. The company's first-party content includes over 200 popular, engaging apps, and its technology brings that content to millions of users around the world. AppLovin is headquartered in Palo Alto, California, Yay area, with several offices globally. You can learn more at applovin.com. Thank you so much to our show sponsor. At the end of the show, we'll bring this back at the end, but we've got a survey. It's how we apply for grants. It's how we solicit funding. It's how, again, we keep the show going. So after the show, we'll bring the slide back up again. And if you have a chance, please fill out the survey and let us know how you thought about the show and who we should invite next to Accented. I also want to announce before we get started with tonight that Accented is now also on Spotify and Apple Music. Apple Podcasts, I mean, we're not playing any music. Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So if y'all are enjoying it, leave a listen and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. This conversation is also going to be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, being released next Friday. So now, to get the show rolling, I have the honor of introducing our co-host, Viet Nguyen, whose novel The Sympathizer won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. His most recent books are Simone, a children's book illustrated by Minnie Fan, and A Man of Two Faces, a memoir, a history, a memorial. He's also the editor of The Displaced, Refugee Writers on Refugee Lives, and the co-founder of DVAN. Welcome back to Accented, Viet. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, Philip, great to be back here with you. I'm doing okay, and I'm really thrilled about our show because I get to have a chance to talk to two of the writers of the TV version of The Sympathizer, my novel. And our first guest is Maegan Houang. She's a writer and director based in Los Angeles and Michigan. She's worked on many shows and films such as The Sympathizer, Shōgun, Counterpart, Jamojaya, Nekrokosm. She has won many awards for her work, which primarily focuses on the complexity of the Asian American experience, intergenerational trauma, and her own experience living as a mixed-race Asian American. Hi, Maegan. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
And our second guest is Anchuli Felicia King. She is a playwright, screenwriter, and multidisciplinary artist of Thai-Australian descent. Felicia's plays have been produced by several companies worldwide. She's under commission with the Royal Court Theatre, Manhattan Theatre Club, Atlantic Theatre Company, Sydney Theatre Company, and Melbourne Theatre Company. Felicia has written episodes on The Sympathizer, of course, and also has been a part of several original series in development, including projects with AMC, BBC Studios, A24, and Warner Brothers. Hi, Felicia.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I think you're calling in from Australia at this moment, right?
I am. I'm in sunny Nam or Melbourne. and it's about midday. It's just gone midday.
Great. And Maegan is calling in from Los Angeles. And maybe that's where we'll start off, because you are both part of what is called in Hollywood a writer's room, which is actually a term I never encountered before I started working on TV. Because for writers, it's mostly just a writer in a room, not
It's just
multiple writers
that room
in a
that you've
room.
got right there, Viet.
Right. I don't want any other writers in this room. That would just mess up my dynamic. You know, I like to work by myself. But in Hollywood, or just maybe in TV making in general, there is a writer's room with many writers. And so we're going to learn more about that, because I think many people in our audience may not know how a writer's room operates. So Maegan, can you tell us what is a writer's room?
Yes, a writer's room. Well, a writer's room is basically a group of writers who are hired to work for a head writer. In Hollywood, that person's often called the showrunner. It's different in different countries. Felicia can really speak to that because she's worked in so many rooms in Australia and the UK, and it does work a bit differently. But for the US, at least, we're just a group of television writers, and the purpose is really one to just move quickly. I actually think that's the original point of having a writer's room. It's that you can sit with a group of people, break story, come up with the ideas, figure out the scenes, and then send people off to scripts. So you can have multiple people write at the same time. So you can have a season of television done in, 20 weeks, which is sort of the goal, or a little longer, a little less, depending on the order. And the other thing is that I think one thing that's in my experience, I've never written a novel, but I have started a novel before. So, but is that I do think television and film, it's very structured. It's like very structural. And so that's why it can be so helpful to have so many people sitting together, breaking out everything so it kind of fits together like a puzzle. And I think that's one way in which it could be a little distinct in just my really very simple, basic experience and knowledge of novel writing. It's not that people, as you can correct me if I'm wrong, don't have the story as they go planned, but for film and television, in a lot of ways, the structure is like 50% of the job, just because we have to get that done. And then also, TV writers are also producers. So another big part of our job is going to set, working with the crew, helping execute the showrunner's vision. And therefore, because we work in such a collaborative medium, that is what film and television is. You have to work with other people to get it done. It sort of starts with the collaboration in the room and then goes out there. And we can essentially just become delegates for the showrunner and the creator's vision. I think that's a decent overview, but yeah.
Yeah, I have so many questions about that, because what you described might work for certain writers, but for a lot of literary writers, and maybe even just a lot of writers in general outside of Hollywood, it's so not a collaborative process, and a lot of it is intuitive. I mean, some writers do like the structure, but not generally to the degree that you've described it. Well, we'll get to that in just a moment, because I want to hear from both of you, and we'll start with Felicia, which is, how did you hear about The Sympathizer as a TV show in the first place, and what did you have to do to get a job in the writer's room? Felicia?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously was aware of the novel, had read it and loved it when it was published. And as with most jobs that I get, it came through my agents. They said that they were staffing this writer's room. And typically what happens when you get staffed on a writer's room is they read your samples, which is, in my case, it's sometimes my plays, sometimes like pilots that I've written. And then you have an interview with the showrunner, and that's about it. And based on those two things, you either get the job or you don't. And then sometimes you are guaranteed to write an episode. Sometimes part of the experience of being in the writer's room is the showrunner decides whether or not to assign you an episode. So it's sort of like a multi-stage interview process that has to do with, like, how engaged you are with the source material in this case, but also like how aligned your voice and style is as a writer with the show and with the showrunner's vision.
So
Yeah,
for
and
the
I think
go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Maegan.
I was just gonna say, like, when I have kind of a funny story about how I heard about it, because my friend, my really close friend, actually had an overall with HBO, and they were asking him if he wanted to work on it, but he was like, I don't really think I'm the right person for that show. You should maybe think about meeting and hiring my friend Megan. And I was definitely tapped because I am part Vietnamese, but also I'm the only writer in the room that's worked previously on a spy show. So before
Mm.
I'd spent 2 seasons on the show Counterpart, which has not that many people have seen, but it's a Starz show that's like a sci-fi espionage drama. And so that was also a big reason why I think HBO wanted to meet me, was just to have at least somebody there who had broken story from that worldview. And, you know, I've read a lot of Jean Le Carré and stuff like that because of that experience. So and Graham Greene and all sorts, you know, you can name the list, I guess, of classics. So I think that that's another thing they're looking for, is like sample previous experience. And then at least for us, what was really surprising is we were actually two of the lower level writers in the room. We weren't upper level at all. And we were actually told that HBO really wanted to only hire co-EPs, which is like the highest level you can get. And so they sort of made an exception to hire us. We had no idea if we were going to get scripts. So both of us were really excited when Dawn and Park decided that we would get our own episodes.
Mm. You've mentioned this term break story a couple times now, Megan. For the people that, maybe including me, that don't know what that means, what does it mean to break story?
It means, it's the crude version, I guess, that maybe you've seen in a TV show, is like we put cards on the board for scenes.
Mm.
So it's kind of deciding like what the order of the scenes. So people do it differently. The way I was taught to do it is that we would break stories for characters. So it'd be like, in this episode, this is the captain's character story, and also like what happens to him with plot, and what's like sort of how are we taking him from A to B to C for an arc. And then we would say like, okay, here's Bond's story. And obviously they're going to have scenes that overlap, especially on something like The Sympathizer. Almost every scene is in the captain's point of view. But on another show, they might not overlap. And then we would blend, we call it like the blend. So once we have the stories, then we blend them together into an order. And then we call it, in other rooms I've been in, is fall through the episode. So then we walk through that structure over and over again, talk through the details of every scene, make sure that we're all kind of on the same page of what's going on with the plot, the story, the characters. I mean, for television, in my view at least, people really watch TV for characters. So that's where a lot of the focus ends up being on, like, what's the story we're telling with this character and how are we going to shape that over the course of the season. Like in the Shōgun room, we have this thing we call a character battleship. And it's just a giant board with every single character and then every episode, and we just track their arc across every episode for every character. And because there's so many characters on that show, we have like 20 characters. And it'll be someone who maybe, even somebody who was in 3 episodes will like track where they are. So it feels like each character has a complete story over the course of the episode. That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about in the room. A lot of it's character stuff. And then scene work is just kind of dependent on the showrunner, right? Like some showrunners, I've worked in rooms where we're kind of like writing the outline together, and I've worked in rooms where it's like a really broad card that's like, Blackthorn goes on the ship. And it's like the notes tell us that there's a lot more to the scene than that. So it just sort of depends on the show. On The Sympathizer, it was kind of in between, but the cards are pretty broad, and that was partially because we had this wonderful book to work from. So we were able to like reference both the notes from the room and the book and sort of figure out what of the scene we wanted to take. And the reason we do it as a group too is that I do really think that like some authorship is really helpful in storytelling. And so we want to be executing Park and Dawn's vision. And so we're doing it as a group with them so they can essentially approve in some ways what we're doing, so that we're filtering through some point of view so we don't get 7 completely different episodes and tones.
Right. Can y'all take us into the Sympathizers writers room? Like, what was that? What is the vibe in there? I know it's like y'all are probably also working on it during the pandemic, I think, and there's like some interruptions in production. And then also, if y'all could also start to speak about like what it was like for y'all. I mean, to be mixed women writers in this Sympathizers writing room. If y'all could elucidate some of that process. We'll start with you, Felicia.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of, it was a slightly surreal experience for me for a lot of reasons. It was in the middle of the pandemic. You know, we were in lockdown here in Australia. So I only saw people over Zoom in the writer's room. I like didn't have any other social interactions for that whole period. I was also working in a very strange time zone. So I was working 3 a.m. to 8 a.m. every day, which was like absolutely brutal. So it sort of feels like to me, almost like hallucinatory. I sort of can't believe that it happened and that I hope I was like semi-conscious through the writer's room. But I will say, like, because it was my first time on a US show, I think I was learning a lot about how the system was different between the UK writers' room that I did and the kind of American style of writers' rooms. And thankfully, I really felt like Maegan and Naomi Yazuka, who was also in the room with us, mentored me a lot and sort of helped me understand like the differences in the showrunner model and how you are supposed to break story. And so it was actually a huge learning experience for me. And I felt a lot of solidarity and I got a lot of help from them, which I really appreciated.
None of us could ever tell that she was getting up at 3 a.m. Honestly, you didn't seem incoherent at all. It was very impressive.
Thanks. Thank you.
I got to join the writer's room once, and I remember this was at the beginning of the whole process, where I met with everybody in the writer's room virtually on Zoom. So I never actually got to attend a physical writer's room or anything like that. And I thought it was really interesting because there was this range of experience and in the writer's room itself. And my function in that writer's room was to answer all of your questions from the writers about the vision of the novel and the Vietnam War and all these kinds of things. And a little bit of background for all of this adaptation process is that I had met with director Park Chan-wook, as whose name has been mentioned, and he was one of the co-showrunners. And I had met with Don McKellar, the other co-showrunner. And with director Park, he had all these questions for me about the novel, and they were great questions because he had clearly read the novel, which I'm not sure it's always true in Hollywood, just to be a little skeptical. And they were great questions. He understood story, he understood narrative, he understood character, politics, history, which made him really a great co-showrunner. Don, of course, was also very sophisticated. And before we ever got Park Chan-wook on board, Don and I had met. And we had worked out that this was going to be a 6 to 8 episode TV series. And we had talked about how to break the novel down and so on into different episodes. And eventually, I think he and Director Park landed on 7 as the key number for these episodes. So we're going to get into all of that, the way the different episodes work and everything. But one thing I want to point out about the writers' room, which was really interesting to me, is that the overwhelming majority of the writers were women. That was a very key decision on the part of Don to hire a lot of women on the show. And I think all the women were Asian or Asian American or mixed race Asian. And I'm just wondering if the two of you can talk about that experience, because I'm assuming that's actually kind of unique, that it's rare to end up with a writer's room with so many women and so many women of Asian descent.
It's hard because it wasn't rare for me simply because the Shōgun room is also mostly mixed race Asian women, but it's definitely rare in Hollywood. That's just happens to be, I guess, my lot. It was great to have Naomi and Felicia there because we did have an affinity with obviously the experience of the captain. We clearly had similar experiences in I think a really interesting way. There's always the like I have an Asian dad and like a white mom, and Naomi has an Asian mom and a Latina mother, and sorry, an Asian dad and a Latina mother, and Felicia has I'm like weird speaking for you, but she has like an Asian mom and like a white dad. So like we have like different experiences with that and like different points of view on it. But I think just like the way that the captain is in the middle of things, we can really understand that experience because we have kind of lived that for our entire lives, where you never really fit in, where people are wondering where you're from, who you are. And so I think it was nice to just not have to be the only voice to that, because a lot of times in a room, you just end up being traditionally it's like there's one Asian writer who will speak to all the every Asian experience, no matter what. But I think because there were 3 of us and we all have pretty different experiences, Naomi's part Japanese, I'm part Chinese Vietnamese, and Felicia's Thai, like we have a different affinity, but of course Felicia and I want to fight for like Southeast Asian voices. And so I think it was just like a good balance to just not feel completely alone in what we're sort of being asked to, if I'm being frank, unfairly represent, right? It's like we can't represent every single person's experience, and when there's more of us, we can say that with a lot more authority of like, yeah, that's one version, but like let's go ask and research for other versions, like just like I'm sure you did with your novel, right? Like that's clearly so inspired by you, but you've clearly researched it a lot and you're thinking about so many experiences and collating them into something. So I think it's similar in that way.
Yeah, and I will say from my position, like on this side of the pond, I'm still very regularly the only Asian person, often the only person of color in a writer's room. That's been my overwhelming experience. So it does put that unfair burden of representation on you as the only, like, to honestly represent all marginalized experiences, which you're sort of not really qualified to do. So it was a huge relief to have that sense of like that solidarity, but also having like a multiplicity of experience that we could speak to within the room.
For me, giving away my novel to collaborators was a difficult process. And of course, it's inevitable when you're working with TV and with movies. So it was really, really important to have a role on my part to help pick the collaborators. I felt fortunate that Neve Fitchman was the initial producer because Neve is Israeli Canadian, and then Neve brought in Don McKellar, the co-showrunner and head writer, who is white male Canadian. And I feel like the Canadian part kind of offsets the white male part. That was really crucial, because I felt like Americans in general, but white American men would have a really hard time adapting this novel because it is fundamentally oppositional to white American male takes on the Vietnam War. And Park Chan-wook, of course, is not is Korean. And then, one of Don's major decisions, as I've implied, is that he wanted to bring in Asian women to work on the show. And that was explicitly, in his own words, I think, to paraphrase, was to counter some of the masculinist biases of the novel. And so I'm kind of, and I totally agree with that. I totally agree. The Sympathizer is told from a man's point of view, and he's a very hetero man. And it was really, I had no disagreements with bringing in lots of Asian women or a few Asian women to work on the show. How did you think about that? Like, bringing in your own experiences as Asian women into adapting a novel that in many ways is very much from a man's point of view, even if he is an Asian, mixed race Asian man, and one in which, the objectification of women plays a key role in his imagination. Felicia, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a subject of much discussion and, dare I say, consternation throughout the writer's room. The female characters in the novel, I think, they're sort of extraordinarily rich characters. Like Miss Moray, I think, is a really complex and interesting and fully fleshed out character in the novel, but they are, I don't think this is like, your sort of unknowing bias, Viet. I think it's the fact that there's like a very historically accurate male gaze functioning in the novel, and because everything is framed through his perspective, and so sometimes the female characters in the novel are victims of his male gaze. So we spent a lot of time talking about how do we make sure that we are not objectifying the female characters in the way that the world is objectifying the female characters, and making sure that Lana in particular had a sort of fully realized character arc and complexity and three-dimensionality. And also I think making it clear that just because this is a kind of chauvinist, sexist world that we're operating in, that's not our position as writers in relation to the characters. I don't know. Yeah, Megan, what do you
I think I completely agree with what you said. And I think it's just that tricky balance where when you read the book, it's so much in Captain's point of view that you understand this is his point of view. But when you watch a show, because we're not literally looking at everything through his eyes, we have to be able to show that he sees Lana one way, but she's a fully realized person in another way, which I don't think is necessarily necessary as much in a book. It's just because we really understand. I mean, I felt like I still got that, especially in the beautiful Fantasia sequence. I think that's one of the best parts of the book, when they're talking and with Bond and everything. And like, that's kind of, you use that same device where it's the way that the captain's seeing Bond and Lana talk to each other. Like, that's the way the captain can kind of finally see who she really is. But we just have to think of that on almost like a every scene case that she's in. It's like being able for the audience to distinguish those things so that we're being clear with the story that we're telling and the way that he is versus maybe how she is, if that makes sense.
Mm. And I think, like, I mean, we had the opportunity to talk to both of y'all, both Viet, me and Viet and I had the opportunity to interview y'all for the official Sympathizer companion podcast, which y'all should also listen to, right? But each of y'all, Maegan, you for episode 5, which has the Fantasia sequence, and then Felicia, you for episode 6, are credited as producers under each of those episodes, right? Even though I imagine, like, the writers' room, you're in there through the entirety of the series to make sure that there are those continuities. From the book to what you wrote, because when you wrote the scripts, right, you didn't really know who was going to be playing the roles, right? Like, could y'all speak to some of the challenges in going from book to script to screen? And also, like, how you adapted to the actors that were portraying the characters that you had brought to life in your scripts.
Well, unfortunately, partially because it was a limited series, the sort of traditional TV model where writers go and produce their episodes and are on set, limited series don't do that as much. So we weren't really part of that process. We really we gave a little feedback on some casting stuff, but a lot of that was left to Park and Dawn, and they did do like the final rewrites on everything. And so I unfortunately just don't think we could really honestly speak to that. We just really helped with the overall season, writing things and like giving notes on drafts and stuff. That was kind of where it left it. But on other TV shows I've been on, or in the traditional model, it's a lot of times all the writers are a little bit more involved in set. And that's, again, a lot of that is just to like relieve the burden of the showrunner, because I think there's a lot of we mythologize the job of the showrunner a lot, and it's a really, really hard job. If you think about a movie, you're writing, prepping, shooting, and then doing post. But when you're show running, you're often doing all those things at the same time. And that's a big reason why you have a staff to help you with the rewrites, to help you go to set and make sure your vision's getting executed, all those things. So, but limited series, sometimes because of budgetary reasons, or just like the structure is different or the preference of the showrunners, we just weren't, in this case, that involved with set. Even though we both did go to set for a few days, it wasn't necessarily to produce our episodes.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question about the fact that in order to adapt a novel to a TV series or a movie, changes have to be made. And I had to, spiritually reconcile myself that the TV series would do different things. But I'm curious, from your point of view, as you were adapting the series, both in terms of the episodes that you wrote, but also episodes that other writers wrote, what changes do you think were made that you thought worked for the better? Like, how did you do a better job than me, in other words, in writing the story of the Sympathizer?
Better job than what Viet
Well,
wrote himself, and yeah.
Yes, I'm not going to say what we did better than you, because I think that would be spurious. But I do, and also it's just, I think, but I do think that one of the challenges of adapting your book into a TV series is that the spycraft, or like the espionage component in the book, is largely figurative. Like, it's largely kind of being a spy is a metaphor in the book. He's not really doing any active spycraft. And so, like, thank God we had Maegan in the room. One of the real challenges was like, what the fuck is he actually, can I swear? I don't know. What the fuck is he actually doing day to day as a spy? And we had to kind of dramatize it. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges, was actually creating a spy story. We had to kind of invent whole cloth, like what the spy narrative actually was. And then I think the other tricky thing about adapting it was like the book almost operates as a series of discrete vignettes. Not to say that there isn't like overarching plot threads, but you sort of move from one sort of complete, like the films is a great example of this, right? Where it's sort of a self-contained narrative. And so part of the challenge of turning that into a series is how do we sort of stretch characters and stories over multiple episodes so it doesn't feel like an anthology series where the episodes are sort of disconnected from one another. So I'd say there was sort of like big structural challenges to breaking your novel into like 7 discrete episodes. Yeah.
I think also point of view is a big challenge just because that was a lot of what we debated, and Park and Don really wanted to keep it like on Captain's point of view, which makes sense. But then I think that also can become really hard because we have to cut always to things through Captain's point of view. And a lot of times when we're structuring things for movies, we're trying to like come up with different things to cut away to like keep the narrative going. So those are just like the things inherently I think difficult in adapting the book. But I mean, it's such a wonderful book that it was also just fun to adapt because we got to use all these great scenes and like really wonderful dialogue and made our jobs a lot easier too.
So you are both younger writers, I think, and I think we're all familiar with the narratives of how Hollywood has really been problematic for women, for Asian Americans, for Asian American women, or Asian women in general. And yet at the same time, we seem to be at a moment where Hollywood seems to have shifted a little bit. We've had some remarkable movies and TV shows featuring Asian or Asian American characters, from Everything Everywhere All at Once to Beef. And of course, Maegan, you've also been involved in probably the biggest hit of the last year or so, Shōgun, as well. We have new things coming out like Interior Chinatown, based on Charles Yu's National Book Award winning novel, and Charles is the showrunner of that TV series. Do you think this is real? Is this a real shift? Is this a qualitative shift? Which will obviously mean a lot for your careers, I hope, or is this an illusion, as so many other moments in the past in Hollywood have turned out to be for Asians and Asian Americans?
I don't think it's an illusion. I think just looking at numbers, we have to be fair to ourselves of like the first and only all Asian American cast movie was Joy Luck Club, and that was now over 30 years ago. 30 years ago, a really long time ago. And no matter what we think of anything in terms of quality, we've had so many more projects now with a predominant, if not even all Asian or Asian American cast that have hit the mainstream. And those are all definitely wins for our community. I think at the end of the day, Hollywood as an institution will always be incredibly risk averse. And therefore, even if you have like the greatest story in the world, they're going to look for any factor to reduce that risk. And that could be in the form of cast. So like, I think Robert Downey Jr. in The Sympathizer is a really good example of how, because we don't have this like group of famous enough Vietnamese actors or Vietnamese American actors who could be in The Sympathizer, they need to pair it with a star to justify the cost of the show. You can even see it on Shōgun, where it's a kind of an interesting comparison where because Hiroyuki Sanada exists, we at least have a recognizable Japanese actor that they can then pair with a white guy that, I think in whatever we think is true or not in their minds makes the show a lot more accessible and therefore less risk averse. And I think that's just how a lot of people in Hollywood think. And as much as I can also feel so much vitriol towards it, I also try to think about it through their lens. And film and television is a huge barrier to entry. Like there's a huge barrier to entry to barrier. Oh my God, sorry, I don't know why I can't think of this. Whatever. It costs a lot of money. And so basically like to say here's $100 million for your thing, they need to really feel like they're going to make that money back. And I think if you can think a little bit in their mindset, it can help you or me or Felicia, all of us, just anyone get their projects made, right? Like we don't really have like a Denzel Washington anymore, but if you think about the 90s, there's so many, or Will Smith, both of them got so many incredible movies made simply because of their star power. And we can always hope that they could have done more or whatever we can, but it's easy to criticize from the outside when it's just so difficult to like get stuff made. And so I think that Park Chan-wook being attached to The Sympathizer is another example of that. gives a lot of executives reassurance that this is going to be like a really good, interesting show because there's an auteur behind it. And like that's how the thinking is. So I think it's gotten better because I think culturally we've shifted the narrative to see that a lot of people do want diverse stories that are different. And I think in a lot of ways Hollywood responds to that. I think you can have like forward-thinking filmmakers like Daniels who clearly think outside, like created this really big project, really like when you like nobody making Everything Everywhere All at Once thought that movie was going to be a huge hit. And that's why it only cost $15 million. And that's why that's also why Jamie Lee Curtis is in the movie. Not because she isn't great or anything. It's just like they needed somebody like Jamie Lee Curtis to justify a $15 million budget. But if you're me and you watch that movie and you see that there's only 7 VFX artists who did the VFX on it, who are literally all music video directors I personally know, you realize that they made this movie with no money, right? Like they really like blood, sweat, and tears made that movie, and look at what a cultural shift it's created. That's not fully inside the business pushing that shift, right? That's a little bit like independent filmmakers coming from the outside, getting enough of a reputation to take a risk that's changing the conversation and then happens to win 10 Oscars, which again, I promise no one ever thought would happen. And also no one ever thought Shōgun was going to be, at least when we were working on it, we thought, we'll make a good show, but will anyone watch it, right? So I think it goes hand in hand, if that makes sense. I'm rambling a little, so I'm going to stop talking. Felicia.
Dude, no,
I would just say that, you know, $15 million is nothing. From a writer's point of view, it's like that's a huge amount of money, but obviously for Hollywood, it is not that much money at all. You know, what's really fascinating about this is a hypothetical, which we will never know, which is that when we were first discussing the budget for this TV series before Robert Downey Jr. came on board, I think the figure being thrown around was roughly $50 million for a whole TV series. And we were modeling that on Narcos, the TV series. And then Robert Downey Jr. came on board, which is a great stroke of luck. But then I think at that point, the budget either went up 50% or 100%, depending on who you talk to. So I wonder if in this hypothetical parallel universe, would we have been able to make this TV series without someone like Robert Downey Jr. on board? We will never know. Anyway, Felicia, what do you think? Have things improved?
Who I've also got to say, I'm still salty about how he was the only Emmy nominated actor, an Emmy nomination from the Sympathizer series, you know.
Let's not get into that territory. You know, I have so much to say
that...
about how I think we were cheated in
the Emmy
I'm mad. Nominations, right? So, and I speak as someone who thinks awards don't mean anything in terms of art.
They don't.
Obviously, they mean a lot in terms of business, and Hollywood is, you know, 50% business or 75% business at the very least. Sorry, Felicia.
As we're talking about the numbers, yes,
improving or not improving the situation of Asians and Asian Americans in Hollywood.
You know, it's interesting. So I started in theater, obviously. I started as a playwright. I trained as a playwright in New York. And in New York, we often talk about this thing called like the off-Broadway ceiling for Asian American playwrights. So you can sort of get your you can get a play produced off-Broadway, but to be an Asian American writer on Broadway is nigh impossible. Like Young Jean Lee is the only Asian American female playwright to ever be produced on Broadway. David Henry Hwang is the only Asian American playwright to ever be nominated for a Tony Award for Best Play ever. And so I think what we have seen since kind of like 1965, the birth of Asian American theater, is that we have these waves of progress and then things stagnate, and then we have another sort of rapid period of acceleration, like with any civil rights. And so I think what's been happening in Hollywood over the past, let's say, 5 years to a decade is that there has been a rapid acceleration, but it's worth thinking about how relatively recent that is in the history of Hollywood, actually. That we have, since sort of Crazy Rich Asians onward, we've seen this really big wave, but the cynic in me thinks that a period of rapid acceleration is always followed by a period of stagnation. And so it's sort of, as Asian American, Asian Australian, British Asian writers working within the Hollywood ecosystem, the burden is on us to make sure that we are not part of that stagnation and that we make sure that the door remains open for people coming in after us. And making sure that there's not like a sort of complacency that sets in where Hollywood goes, oh, we fixed the problem, now racism is solved. And then things sort of start to revert to the way that they used to be.
Mm. So I'm also, curious. We've been talking about the money and this macro level, like what does this mean for Asian American like art to be in the mainstream, but I want to bring it back down to like y'all's individual lives. I think this weekend is the 6 month half birthday of since when the Sympathizer was released to
Mm.
the public, right? So in this past 6 months, like how have your lives changed, if at all? What have y'all sort of been up to since then? What's the reception been? Have you watched the Sympathizer with your parents? That goes in, you included, Viet, but I'll start with you, Felicia.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that it's strange. I sort of feel like when you're there's such a long lead time between when you work in a writer's room and when something gets released. That I start a writer's room on Monday that will get released in 3 years' time. So you're always in this strange sort of like temporal disjunction where you're actively working on new TV shows and you can't really gauge what's going to happen 3 years from now, whether it's going to be a hit, whether nobody's going to watch it. So I like I was it was amazing to get to go to LA and be at the premiere and see the impact that the Sympathizer had on the audience, and also like meet the writers for the first time because we
Yeah.
hadn't met in person.
Mm.
But it's this really strange thing where I just went straight into the next job, and that's sort of the life of a screenwriter. You're kind of always in writers' rooms or in development, and you hope that it will be a smash hit and tons of people will watch it. But for me, it's far more about, I try to invest in like the process of making the work and being diligent and hardworking in the moment, and try not to future proof it so much or think about what the metrics of success for me are. Just like, am I doing the best job that I can day to day in the writer's room and in the scripts that I'm writing? Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's been a pretty surreal year for me because I worked on Shōgun in 2019 to 2020, and then we worked on the Sympathizer in 2021 to 2022, and they came out back to back. So I think that just really illustrates Felicia's point that we work on these things and they can come out so much later, and so much of that isn't in our control. So we do just kind of try to focus on what can we do now? What can we focus on? How can we make this script or this story the best that we can? And again, in our job, like we work for the showrunners, so like set the showrunners up for success and like execute their vision too. And I think both of us, like our own goal would be one day to have our own shows or do our own projects. But that's what's so great about the job we're in now, is that if we're ever lucky enough to have that, then we really understand how to utilize our staff because we've been staffed before. And it's just can be a difficult job too. Like we want to do the best jobs that we can. I don't know. It's like not the most exciting answer. I've definitely had a very surreal year though, for real, for sure.
Be it.
Well, we actually have some questions from the audience before we have our
Before we get
difficult
into how your
final
last 6 months.
question.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've got one from Jen Chang in the Q&A function, who asks, what's next? Would y'all like to see a spin-off, or what kinds of API stories would you like to see next? Have you all read The Committed? Maegan, I'll pass this one to you first.
I would love for there to be more Sympathizer stories. I like, again, it's just like depends. We just don't have say in that. That's the thing that's so hard, is like, I guess it's hard for me, even though I want to be like, I'm so hopeful, because I just feel like sometimes that's so out of our control. It's hard for me to be like, yes, because I don't know if that will ever happen. But it would be amazing if there was. And I would be hoped to be asked to work back on it. That's the other thing, is like, if it happens, like you never know if you're gonna work on it either. But I think the other question was like, what's next, or what other API stories?
Yeah.
Right.
What kinds of API stories would you like to see?
I would just love to see. I would love more international stories that center countries. This is going to sound a little bit crazy because of the show I work on, but center countries that aren't Japan, Korea. I think we can think bigger than East Asia. And it really bums me out because even with like my own family history, I just have this sense of how interconnected Asia as a giant ass continent, it feels silly to even say Asia. Like I say it, I'm like, okay. But there's just so many other stories that I mean, you could just go on and on. I think somebody's going to make a movie about that woman who's a Chinese pirate. I think that would be a great TV show. I could see, you know, I could get, because it could get produced, I could be really into an adaptation of Taipan simply because I would be really excited for someone to talk about the founding of Hong Kong, which is where my dad grew up, and like the way that really like mixes with colonialism and China and Hong Kong and global colonialism in general. Like I just think there's so much more that's beyond just kind of the countries that we go to and check off our list. And then from an Asian American perspective, I would love to see more Asian American stories that aren't about East meets West and just are about people living their lives. You know, I kind of have this joke that the first generation of Asian American stories is going to be like the East meets West, The Farewell, which is a great movie, but I still think falls into that category. And the second is more like a Justin Chon movie, like Gook, just telling a story about people in K-Town who are living their lives and like having a real Asian American experience. And so I'm hopeful for more stories to kind of enter that zone and to not be so in conversation with whiteness, I guess, which I think would be interesting. They're always in conversation with it because of where we live and who we are, but I think there's a way where it doesn't have to be so on the nose for audiences. So yeah, I think that's kind of like what I would like to see in the future.
I mean, I'm quite lucky in that I'm a playwright. And so what these sort of like areas of curiosity that I have, I think Megan and I have a lot of actually shared areas of curiosity and interest, but I've always been really interested in globalization and the relationship of sort of the westernized Asian diaspora with people homeland Asians. And so I'm quite lucky that I get to explore that subject matter in my playwriting. And my hope is that one day there's more of like a sort of overlap between the things that I've been interested in as a playwright and the stuff that I get to write about on screen. Because I think there's so many incredibly rich, fascinating stories that we can tell, not just about sort of like the identity politics of Asians, but about the the economics and the politics and the this what it means to have like these sort of these empires and superpowers that we have in the world now. And I just think sort of like I think post-colonialism has been a real source of interest for me as a writer, so I hope that there's more post-colonial stories on TV in the future.
We have a question from Heather Lay. Heather asks, what was the most difficult or the most surprising parts of your job working on the Sympathizer?
For me, it was sleep deprivation.
Nice.
Yeah,
that's very fair.
Yeah, it was a really I sort of thought that my body would naturally adjust to working in that time, and it turned out that it just got more and more difficult as the show went on. But the most surprising, sort of everything was surprising for me because it was my first US writers' room. I feel like I was learning so much on the job. Yeah.
I feel like I was just such a fangirl of Park Chan-wook that the most surprising thing to me was just getting to work on a show with him. That was pretty shocking to me the entire time. And I had so much faith in his vision, like I was just like really excited to kind of do what he wanted to do because I've been a fan for such a long time that I think that's like the thing that I found the most surprising. Difficult, I mean, I didn't find the job particularly difficult because we had such a great room and we all worked really well together, and we're still friends with the writers, and so I think it was a good experience in so many ways, and I couldn't have been more excited to work on it. So I think I was also just constantly surprised that I got the job.
We have a question from Samina, who asks, is there a market for Asian American stories made outside, to be made outside of Hollywood? Could our stories get produced outside of the US and then released globally, a la K-dramas? Do y'all think, based on your experience in the industry?
Oh,
I'm happy to speak to
absolutely.
this
Yeah,
as an.
you
Sorry, you go.
you
Maegan.
go first. No, you go first. You go first.
I was just gonna say, as an Australian, I have a lot of experience of this because we make a lot of co-productions here, and we have lots of streamers who are breaking into the Australian market. And so that's been really fascinating to see these sort of like big international co-productions that we're having in Australasia. And I think, yeah, there's a huge market for TV outside of the American audience. And it's very exciting that, you know, as much as there's a sort of dystopic element to these multinational conglomerates owning everything, owning all of our IP and employing us, there is also opportunity in that because Amazon exists everywhere, Netflix exists everywhere, and as increasingly as screenwriters, we get to speak to a global audience, which as a globalist, I find very invigorating.
Yeah, I basically completely agree. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think that at the end of the day, people really just love great storytelling and really interesting characters. And I think that the only thing we always have to be mindful of, because this is just the reality, is that while there's also opportunity, there's always going to be like a bit of a political impulse for what's acceptable to cross over. And I think that's why we see like certain countries like Korea have content that's like a little bit more accessible, or because it's not that other countries aren't making a lot of content. Like India is a perfect example of a country that makes lots and lots of content that we don't always get access to. So all those things are tied together. So I think it also depends. Like as an example, I think it'd be really difficult to get like a Russian or an Iranian TV show like to penetrate the global marketplace right now, just for like political reasons, not like because they're good or bad. There's actually like some really incredible Iranian filmmakers that I love, but I just don't think that unless they kind of hit a certain kind of narrative, there's going to be like a market for them at this moment. And that's just the reality that, we also exist within. So, I think you have to understand that if you're trying to tell a specific kind of story. Again, I think everyone should pursue whatever that they find meaningful and is good for them, but then also approach the marketplace with a lot of pragmatism. Again, how can I make that idea risk averse for the market and understand like what you're up against? Because that's just also a little bit part of the calculus of like what are the cultural norms and what's accepted in the moment.
On pragmatism, we've got this question from Josephine, who I believe is calling in from Sydney. I think this one's directed at you, Felicia. As an Australian screenwriter, do you think it's possible to continue to work remotely from Australia and enter these writers' rooms, or do you have to travel there and break in and continue working in these writers' rooms when you have projects?
Yeah, I think it's changed. I was able to work remotely during the pandemic, and I feel quite sort of perversely fortunate that I started my career as a screenwriter during the pandemic, because I was able to break into UK and US shows, which has historically been quite difficult for Australian screenwriters, but I think it has changed. It seems like most rooms are starting to be in person again. So yeah, after I get off this call, I'm flying to London to start work in London on Monday. So yeah, it's sort of it seems to have reverted to an in-person model again.
And then there's a question from Jay. There's been this huge wave of Asian authors. Are there Asian producers who focus on optioning Asian stories, feature film or episodic? Jay, you should check out the DVAN list, which is this recommendation of works by Vietnamese American authors that DVAN is recommending to be made into films next. But I also want to kind of transform this question and ask y'all both, like, who are the folks that y'all would like to work with or excited to be working with in the community, in your roles in the industry? Yeah, shout
Well,
outs.
I was going to say that I think the question was like which producers are interested in that, and I will say, just to go off that a little bit, is that what I think is a really positive moment is that I talk to execs all the time of different backgrounds working for different types of creators who are interested in kind of any and all stories. And I do think that is a pretty massive shift That doesn't mean that networks will buy them. It doesn't mean that studios will make those films. But I do think that a lot of producers, at least at the ground floor development, they're pretty open-minded about developing a project. And that is step one. The other steps are a lot harder because that's when like the hard money gets involved. But I think that that's like a benefit of how things have shifted. And just in terms of people that I would love to work with, um, I mean, there's a lot of people. I feel like on the spot, I don't want to like not, I gotta say something good. I don't know, like there's tons of different creators and authors that I would love to work with. I love, yeah. I'm gonna
Your
just stop
Emmy
talking and
speech,
pass that
Megan.
off. Yeah, no, I can't do that.
Yeah, I will shout out like CJ as an example of like a producer who's producing Asian stories for Asian audiences. I think there's tons of really great Asian American and Asian producers working in Hollywood now, and it's really an exciting moment to see that there's yeah, there's actually tons of Asian American stories floating around in development, as Megan says. It's harder to get something greenlit and off the ground. In terms of people that I would like to work with, I think there has been like an absolutely incredible couple of years of books by Asian American and Asian authors. And I'm really excited for them to have screen adaptations. And I am very excited for Interior Chinatown. But you know, I'm really excited for the adaptations of all R.F. Kuang's books. I think there's going to be a bunch of really exciting Asian screen adaptations in the next couple of years that not just as a screenwriter, but as a viewer, I'm really excited to see.
That's awesome. And as we approach our closing and final questions for tonight's show, wanted to remind our audience members and on-demand stream viewers, podcast listeners, to support DVAN, the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network. There is a QR code on your screen. If you could take a moment to fill out our survey and really help us rewrite narratives and move from the margins into the mainstream through our work, through programs like this, through our events like writers' residencies, all of which you can find out more about on dvan.org. Viet, we have got a question for you from Nick Annette Miller. And also to segue into our closing, if there was anything from the Sympathizer novel that you had to fight to keep in the TV show. And I think at this point, 6 months after the show's release, we are a spoiler zone. Feel free to spoil the show and the ending. But yes, was there anything that you had to fight to keep?
You know, one of the more notorious episodes from the novel was the squid episode, which we don't have to get into, but that was included without a fight, as far as I know. And, you know, the only thing we had to be careful about there was the age of the actor who was participating in the squid episode. That's all I'm going to say. But the more substantive issue was probably the fact that I really wanted to have a cast that was primarily Vietnamese. And we did manage to achieve that. I mean, all the people who are Vietnamese in the novel are played by Vietnamese actors of various kinds of nationalities and descents and origins and so on. So that was, I thought, really incredible, because whatever you think of the TV series, I thought it was the visual impact and knowledge of the fact that this is a story about Vietnam and its diaspora, and that most of the people you're going to see are going to be Vietnamese people of one kind or another. That knowledge I thought would be so important to the audience. And the second thing was that if they were actually speaking Vietnamese in real life in the movie or the TV series, then they really should be speaking Vietnamese, because obviously the Hollywood custom has been that Hollywood has been so uncomfortable with non-English language dialogue that there have been so many movies and TV shows where people are clearly speaking in another language, but they're actually speaking in English. And that doesn't happen in our TV series. And a lot of that is attributable to the commitment of Park Chan-wook and Don McKellar and our screenwriters to make it work so that, you know, when people are speaking Vietnamese, they're really speaking Vietnamese. And if they had to speak English, then there was a justification in the narrative for the fact that the captain and the general would be speaking English to each other. And I thought that was brilliant, the way that the writers pulled that off.
Dang.
Oh,
While we're on this, might as well just ask like Megan and Felicia, like was there anything that from the novel that you had to fight to keep? Like, what did you have to fight to keep in the TV show from your scripts, from what you had written? Like, this TV show cannot be made without including
Well,
these aspects of it.
it's just it was a long
I
time ago, so I'm trying to remember. You go first.
I mean, I think I was a purist. I fought to keep as much from the novel as possible, down to, you know, it's got so many pithy one-liners and sort of incredibly prosaic passages and so much sort of like philosophical depth to it that if you read the first draft of my script, I mean, I pilfered as much from the novel as I humanly could. And I did that right throughout. I always wrote with the book open next to me. So yeah, I fought to keep as much as I could. And I'm quite glad that a lot of the lines that are from the book ended up in the final episode.
Yeah, I did lose a battle that I'm sad about, which is that actually I was just remembering the Bon Lana scene that was in my original draft, but Park and Don took it out, and I'm really sad about that because I love that scene and I feel like it told us so much about both those characters. So I don't know, we really fought to it's true, we really fought to keep a lot of it um in the book, I mean in the from the book in the show. We a couple other battles we lost, if they're interesting to people, is there's obviously that section when they go back to Vietnam and Thailand, and it's like a war. And I remember a pitch I was really excited about that didn't work out was that the teaser of the first episode would be like a first person Vietnam War movie. So it'd be like we would almost play with the trope of like we're finally in a Vietnam War movie for the first time. We're sort of playing with it, but it's just a teaser, and then you like cut to credits. So that we don't actually have to live in it too long, because that was something we felt like we didn't have the space in 7 episodes to keep. So that's why we abbreviated it at the top of 7, intercutting with the bar. And then the other thing I was really excited about that we didn't end up doing, but it was really inspired by my own experience as a music video director, was Felicia, remember the number of times I was pitching that when he's in the interrogation room, it's like the set's like moving to go through his life, so it's like becomes really really surreal, but that's a very music video driven pitch. So those are things that I remember that didn't happen, that weren't exactly the novel, but were just ideas inspired by the novel of how to kind of visualize what was happening in the book, because it is such a subjective book, and like leaning into that subjectivity as much as possible in the final episode. But yeah, we fought for lots of, I don't know, we mostly just wanted to keep, especially the scenes where people were talking. I feel like any of those, we felt like we should just use it. It's great.
I don't know about you two, but I was paid per episode, so I wanted more episodes.
Yeah.
We only added
Yeah.
7. I was like, I
Yeah,
want
use
why
the
not
dialogue
20
sort
or
of verbatim
10,
where we could.
episodes, right? Yeah, but that was art. Director Park and Don McKellar wanted art and not pure commodity, so we ended up with 7 episodes. Let's end with, what was your favorite scene or episode from the Sympathizer TV series? For me, it's a really hard question to answer because I'm so close to the TV series and obviously to my own novel that everything looked good to me.
I think my favorite scene was, oh, thank you for the question, Viet. My favorite scene was when they hop out of like the powder baby blue like car, and then like they're just in the middle of nowhere, and then Hoa hits Bon with a line that's like "Ủa tao tôi tưởng mày thích phim cowboy mà." It's like, I thought you liked cowboy movies, and he's like writing it, and I feel like the jabs in between them was something that really spoke to like the sort of like camaraderie that they had with each other, even though they're on different sides.
I think I'm gonna pick a moment in Felicia's episode that I think is a line from the book, which is when Bond says life is a suicide mission. And the reason why is because I think when I saw that, it was a moment, and I know it was in the trailer, but it was just a moment for me where I was like, whoa, this is really happening. And I think Fred gives a really good performance of that, like delivery of that line. And so it just kind of felt like one of those surreal moments where I felt that sort of emotional, like, holy shit, it's like a real show that people are gonna watch, and that's so cool, and it's gonna talk about all these complex things in such an incredible way that
Mm.
it just feels like a gift that it got to exist in that sense, because it is just it's such a it just talks about so many important things that affect our lives but that we don't think about, and so for it to be dramatized and for people to see it, I think that was just a moment. And I know it's in the trailer, but I think for us, because we like wrote the show and watched it, that was just my first moment of being like, holy, like it's coming to life, like this is so real. um I think that I don't know, like the first time I saw it, I actually cried when he said that line.
Mm. Yeah, I was also gonna, I mean, I'm obviously partial to episode 6, but there's a scene that I think we all loved in episode 6 was the hair cutting scene, where the captain cuts Bond's hair, and Bond says, I think it's like, thank you for keeping me alive for this long. And I just think the performances in that scene are so beautiful, but also, you know, you've been on such a journey with those two guys, and yeah, I just think it's in the context of what can be like a pretty like bombastic show, it's this very sort of quiet, intimate, moving scene. So yeah, I've always really loved that scene.
I had two favorite scenes, and they were the scenes that I wrote. So when HBO, the upper powers that be at HBO saw the first episode, what Don McKellar said to me was, "Oh, they think that the audience is going to need some backstory to understand the Vietnam War and what we're going to see right now." And it's like, oh my God, how do we do that? The Vietnam War and all of this history is super complicated. But Don wanted me to try to come up with some kind of opening lines to summarize enough history for the audience to understand. And so when you watch the first episode, the first thing you see are I think it's like 3 slides that talk about, you know, the Vietnamese history up until that point. I wrote that. So that's one of my favorite scenes. That was like 25 words. And then the second favorite scene was, I remember watching the final episode in draft form, episode 7, and getting to the very end. And I had already read the script of episode 7, so I thought I knew what was going to happen. But in the draft version, after everything had been filmed and everything, I realized there was a monologue at the end of episode 7 that wasn't in the script. And the monologue was obviously drawn from my novel at the end, but it was missing a few key words. So I wrote Don McKellar, the head writer, a very nice note saying, "I love it, Don, but maybe you could rewrite the last 25 words in this fashion." And I sent him the 25 words. And he said, "Well, I'm going to run it by Director Park and HBO, and we'll see if we can get these final words in." And in fact, they did manage to get those final words in. And the reason why that was so important to me was that in the end of the novel, the captain looks out upon Vietnam as he's leaving on the refugee boat for the second time, and he says, I'm paraphrasing here, "I'm still a revolutionary in search of a revolution." And the word revolution was not in that draft episode that I had seen.
Mm.
And I said, "Can we please put revolution back in there?" And in the end, that is actually what happens. And that's so important to me because The Sympathizer, the novel and the TV series, is many things. It's about the Vietnam War. It's about the drama of being refugees. It's about communism and anti-communism. It's about a mixed race person's conflicted internal drama, but it's also about the necessity of revolution as well. I want to thank my co-host Philip Nguyen and our two guests today, Anchuli Felicia King and Maegan Houang, two of the screenwriters for the TV adaptation of The Sympathizer. It's been so great talking to you tonight. Good luck to you in your future endeavors. You both have really exciting things that you're about to work on and that you could not talk about tonight because of Hollywood. But thanks for being here with us this evening on
Thank you so much for
Accented.
having me.